When disaster strikes, will you be ready?
Good evening, and we begin tonight with the monster hurricane and its deadly impact already.
When all hope is gone, will the government be there for you? If you're looking for ways to take your prepping to the next level, then you've come to the right place. Broadcasting from a secure and well-prepared location, it's time for Prepping 2.0. And now, please welcome authors Glen and Shelby Gallagher.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Prepping 2.0. This is one of your hosts, Shelby Gallagher, and I am joined here today with my co-host and co-host in life, Glen Tate. Good morning, Glen.
Good morning, Shelby. Good morning. It's fun. We have an amazing show. We got up early. We're nerds. That's okay. We were so excited because this topic is important. We got up, rushed to our studio, and we get to talk to Matt Shea today, which we'll be doing in a moment. We're going to be talking about an objective analysis, not an emotional one, but an objective analysis of whether we're headed for civil war. We're doing this with Washington State Representative Matt Shea, who's a Patriot leader, well known, I think, throughout the country. The SPLC certainly knows him, so that means he's doing something right. And we're going to talk about that. And then in the after show for Patreons, this is a special treat. We ask Patreons what they think a good term is instead of civil war, because it kind of doesn't fit. It fits in a lot of ways, but it doesn't fit in some other ways. I mean, I think we're headed to a civil war, but people don't like that word. That's more my point. What's a more palatable term for this? That's a better way of putting it. And we got several responses that are fascinating and really thought-provoking. We're going to go over those with Representative Shea, who knows his stuff, and it's going to be fun stuff. So what else do we have going on here in the month of December?
Well, let's just put it out there. We have Christmas. We get to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, which we're all looking forward to. And what comes with that a lot of times is gift giving. And it's interesting as I've just kind of interacted with people on social media or whatever, there's preppers out there really like to give unique prepping sorts of gifts. So we have a few for you. If you go to our website, prepping2-0.com, and click on the shop or whatever tab that indicates you can go shopping, we have some new things, which is really cool. Our Patreons got to take advantage of this a little bit sooner, a little bit earlier, I should say, is a proper terminology. Patiently awaiting the collapse. T-shirts are now available for everybody, and we just got a whole new supply of them. Go on over there and check them out, and they are selling quickly. And I'm not just saying that to sound like a used car salesman. No, seriously, they're selling quickly. Stickers, magnets, fun things like that, and it's a great conversation starter. The other one, you have a new thing going on over there as well, Mr. Tate. What is that? Yes,
I've been spearheading this project. That is Patreon only serialized AR-15 magazines. So they are the AR-15 magazines that you guys have seen before, and a lot of you have ordered, which say I Miss America, which again, great conversation starter. You're out at the gun range and somebody sees you with the I Miss America mag in your AR, and I guarantee you're going to start a really cool conversation. You're probably going to meet future team members too. It's great. But we did a special series for Patreon supporters that are serialized. So it's 1 of 100 that's limited edition to 100, 2 of 100, and all of that. I sent out an email last night to Patreons, and pretty close to 100 of them have been snapped up already. If you're Patreon, go ahead and go ahead and see. We still may have some. Anyway, those are cool. So that's one of the benefits of being a Patreon supporter. Exclusive merchandise, so that's really cool. Well, speaking of stuff, we have sponsors. EMP Shield is a sponsor. They make a product that a device, I should say, that EMP proofs whatever it's wired into. And go and look them up and Google it and look at the YouTube videos and see for yourself the independent reviews. If you go to our website, prepping2-0.com, and you click on the Friends and Affiliates tab and the EMP Shield logo, through that portal, you can then get $50 off each device. They're about $300 to $400 to give you an idea of what's involved. New Manna, which makes bulk freeze-dried food, which is outstanding. If you go to Numanna, NUMANN.com, and type in the coupon code PREP, you get 10% off because you're a listener of ours. Katie Armor, CATI, which stands for Come and Take It Armor. Love these guys. They make steel body armor plates with anti-spalling coating, which is important. Look it up. And their website, ktarmor.com. And if you type in Grant as a coupon code, you get 10% off. And then you have a sponsor you've developed a relationship with. Who's that, Shelby?
That is Ace 2 Tactical. Great folks that make great paracord slings for hunting, for defense, and knife sheaths and all kinds of cool things. Their website is TWO tactical.com, and their discount code, you'll get 15% off, is prepping20 at checkout, which is great because they're very reasonably priced paracord sheaths and slings, and then you add an extra 15% off. I just think those are great little kind of stocking stuffer almost kind of things. So recommend them as well.
And then we have a magazine that Shelby and I have been subscribing to for a long, long time, and that's Backwoods Home. And here's the thing about magazines, guys, not the gun kind, right? The kind that, come in the mail that are like, literary and journalistic. There's something about a piece of paper, like a magazine, coming in the mail, in the case of Backwoods Homes every quarter, that kind of reminds you to look at stuff. It's not enough to say, oh, I'll go on the website and I'll look this up because it's free on the website. But getting it in the mail, you sit down and you read it. They sit on our coffee table and they become reference sources. So Backwoods Home, and if you use a coupon code, the number 6 OFF 6 off, you get $6 off your annual subscription, which is a cool thing. So there you have it. Well, now let's talk about what people really want to. Well, they don't want to talk about. They want to listen to. And that would be Matt Shea. Matt, as I mentioned, is a representative in the Washington State Legislature, true patriot leader. And he is going to come on and talk to us about an objective analysis with real factors that are weighed. This is a very unemotional analysis of whether we're in a civil war, heading to a civil war. I will let him, define what that all is. So thank you, Matt, for joining us. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, guys, for having me on again. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we love having you on. The last time we had you on, great listener response, thousands of downloads. It was very well received. Well, take it away. Talk to us about this objective analysis of the factors of civil war and where we're at in them as you see them. And I should preface this by saying you are a combat arms military officer, an Army officer who saw combat. So you know a thing or two about this. You're not some white paper guy or some political guy. You're a leader, and that has taken a variety of avenues. One was in the military, and now it's in elected office. So you have credibility on this topic in my and Shelby's mind. So yeah, take it away, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I think it's clear to be succinct on this part of it, that for those of us that have gone overseas and we have received training in objective analysis for different countries around the world, those same factors can apply to America. But there's this normalcy bias in America that things are going to continue the way that they always have continued, and there's not going to be a problem. You guys are creating a problem, and I'm going to address that here in a little bit as well. The bottom line is that we can look at a country, we can look at history, and there are certain factors that are common throughout. Now, there's a lot of arguments between historians, a lot of arguments between people that study warfare, but the factors that I'm about to go through generally hold true throughout. And some people might add to them, may take away one, but generally these factors hold through the whole analysis. If you're looking at most people's history, you're looking at most people's analysis of counterinsurgency, these factors hold true. So what are the root causes of a civil war? Or and more appropriately, it might not be a civil war. It might just be resistance by different regions. And really, I want to start with three scenarios. The first scenario is the secession of one part of a country from another in part. So, for example, Scotland is an idea. where you have, they're still part of the United Kingdom, but in a lot of ways have their own autonomy. The second scenario is complete separation, where you have one country completely separating from another country, like you did with the United States from Great Britain. The third scenario is where in a country you have resistance by region. And one of the probably best modern examples of that is Mexico, where back in the early 1900s, people tried to call that a revolution. It really was not. It was resistance by regions, where you had regions in the south different from regions in the north, all breaking away or resisting the central government of Mexico. So those are really the three scenarios. And I want to get in now to the root causes of civil war or of these types of scenarios. The first is where you have occupation by a foreign power or by a hostile power, and then you have exploitation of the indigenous population. The second root cause is where you have an attack by either the central government or another group of people. That group of people could be ideologically connected, could be connected by religion, could be connected by geography. But that group of people seeks to attack the identity, the culture, tradition, and heritage of another people group. The third root cause is where you see corruption and or repression occurring against a population. So, again, an example of this might be Mexico. An example of this clearly is China, where you have repression of a Christian minority with the return to zero policy of the current regime there. Literally, they want to wipe out Christianity from the face of the earth. Corruption, give you an example down in Mexico. AMLO, who is a Marxist, is trying to use corruption to essentially repress anybody that is in favor of free markets and more freedom in Mexico. The fourth root cause is religion, and I've kind of mentioned this previously before, where you have two dramatically opposed religious groups of folks. So probably the best example today you can see in a place like India, where the Hindu majority is against the Muslim minority and the Christian minority, but most particularly the Christian minority now, where there's a lot of persecution occurring in parts of India. And then the last root cause is where you see economic failure. And you can have all of these root causes mixed together in some degree or another. But economic failure is what affects everybody. And one of the greatest factors that we look at in another country is the number of unemployed males between the ages of about 18 and 54. And if you see that number get over about 10% of the population, then that raises some alarm bells, because unemployed males typically are who are recruited into any sort of fight between two forces, and they can be exploited based on this economic hardship for a number of different means from either side. So those are the five kind of root causes that we look at. Here are five factors also that we look at. This is kind of after you identify, hey, we're starting to see some attacks on the identity of a people group in a country, starting to see occupation, exploitation, corruption, starting to see a little bit of economic failure. Then these are factors that we look at that say, hey, here on a more likely than not basis, this country looks like it is going to descend into low-intensity conflict and perhaps even a civil war. The five factors typically are polarization without resolution. Typically, you see this in what would be called a democracy. Now, we do not live in a democracy in America. We live in a constitutional republic. In a democracy, the majority can vote away the minority, their rights, their money, their property. But in a republic where you have, which comes from the Latin res publica, or the public thing, or rule of law, the minority's rights always are maintained regardless of who is in power. Their right to property, their right to life, their right to liberty, and their right to the ability to defend the same. Those are always kept intact in a republic regardless of who's in power. And again, this is a great misconception out there today, and I believe it's an intentional mischaracterization of our country to get people to believe that there is polarization without resolution. And this is critical when you think of the debate that's going on right now, where people are very concerned that if Donald Trump is not the president, that their rights are going to be taken away. Their right to bear arms is going to be taken away. Their property rights are going to be taken away. Their right to life and liberty are going to be taken away. That should never even come into the discussion in a country that is a republic where those rights can never be voted away. But now you have a group in America, particularly the Marxists, who believe that they can actually vote away those rights, and that's part of the problem. Second factor is divisive press coverage. I don't know if I need to really say much about that, but just Google my name, or better yet, DuckDuckGo my name. Don't use Google, please. Everybody listening, do not use Google anymore. They are trying to manipulate you. If you just take a look at my name on the internet, you're going to see all kinds of stuff. Racism and white nationalism. And what's very interesting is people can see through this pretty easily that, it's kind of a big deal that they call a certain small town up in Northeast Washington a racist, white nationalist, white supremacist compound, and yet they have intentionally refused, this is the mainstream media, intentionally refused to interview the two black pastors that live there, who are pretty upset about being called white nationalists and white supremacists. So people can kind of see through the divisive press coverage, and when they begin to see through that divisive press coverage, they begin to lose confidence in the institutions that are out there, and then what really is the truth and why are they being lied to. The third factor is what I just mentioned, weakened institutions. In other words, people are losing faith in their institutions. They're losing faith in the agencies of government to actually have the best interests of the people at heart. They're losing faith in some law enforcement to have the best interests of the people at heart. They're losing faith in the press. They're losing faith in nonprofit organizations to have their best interests at heart. And they believe that corruption is pervading almost every area of society. The fourth factor is what is deemed the sellout of leadership. Rich Higgins, who was a staffer for the National Security Council, he wrote it might have been a 7-page memorandum to President Donald Trump. And in that memorandum, by the way, President Donald Trump read this and said, "Hey, this is exactly correct. Where's Rich Higgins?" And they said, "Sorry, sir, we fired him." And he asked why, and they said it was because of the memorandum. And that is one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons that H.R. McMaster's was fired, I believe, because he fired Rich Higgins over this memorandum. Well, in this memorandum, specifically, Rich Higgins outlines 3 counter states at work in America: the globalists, the Islamists, and the Marxists. And the Marxists in particular are the action arm right now to try to destroy the republic and overthrow it. That's why he calls them counter states. Their intent is to replace our existing constitutional republic with something very, very different. And in that memorandum, he also notes that the Democrat Party, and this again is not partisan, I'll get to that here in a second, the Democrat Party is the primary enabler of the counter states, both the Islamists and the Marxists. And probably the most visible depiction of this is the Squad. When they go on the TV, you have admitted Islamists who are also hardcore Marxists, members of the Democrat Socialists of America, or they work with the Democrat Socialists of America, and that is that example of the enabling of the counterstate. But the second thing that he says is that the Republican Party, specifically the establishment leadership of the Republican Party, is the designated defeat mechanism for the counterstates. In other words, they actually expect the Republican Party leadership to cave in. At the moment of most need, they expect them to cave in, and they become the designated defeat mechanism. And this is an example, that fourth factor of the sellout of leadership, because people say, well, if the party that's supposed to be fighting for our God-given unalienable rights is giving up, what avenues left do we have? And then the fifth factor is the legitimization of violence. Now, there has been a lot written out there that the right is promoting violence. And I don't believe in a right-left paradigm, by the way. I believe in a right-wrong paradigm. The legitimization of violence really has been done by the mainstream media. And I'm going to give you a specific example. So PJ Media had an article out where they took 60,000 Antifa accounts and boiled them down to 962 main accounts. And of those 962 main accounts, they linked those accounts to reporters from the Huffington Post, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and a guy named Jason Wilson of The Guardian. Now, Jason Wilson, if you DuckDuckGo my name, is the one that has been writing a lot of hit pieces against me for exposing this. He was directly linked to Antifa. Later, because of these articles, I was approached by a reporter in Wenatchee who asked me, do you support political violence? And I said, of course not, and nobody I'm associated with does. We are, very robust defenders of the right to bear arms and self-defense. But I have a question for you. And I asked this on camera. I said, will you denounce political violence from groups like Antifa? And I asked the guy 4 times, and he refused to answer 4 times. Later, The Guardian, now this was a reporter from a different publication, but later The Guardian came out with an article effectively apologizing for Antifa, saying, they have no recourse. This is the only thing they can do. They're oppressed. They're standing up for the rights of people that are oppressed, and they really have no choice. So they were apologizing, legitimizing. I want to be clear about this. The violence of Antifa, but also something more important, the sedition of the Marxists and the Islamists. In other words, these people, these groups, want to overthrow the Constitution of this country, and these mainstream media outlets are covering for them and saying, poor them. Another example of this was this individual who attempted to firebomb the federal facility over in Western Washington about 2-3 months ago. He was quite literally wearing a John Brown gun club hat in one of the pictures that was posted on mainstream media. Interestingly, Alexandria Cortez refused to comment on that. CNN refused to really cover it. He wrote a manifesto literally saying that he is Antifa. And people are saying, well, that's just not that big of a deal in the mainstream media. Yes, it's a huge deal. You have a man who identified as Antifa. You have a man who was wearing a John Brown gun club hat. And for those of you that don't know history, John Brown was a terrorist. But a lot of people don't know he was a Marxist as well back in the Civil War era. He killed women and children. So that's an example of the legitimation of violence.
Matt, sorry to interrupt you, Matt. We're going to have to come out of this segment. We will rejoin in the second segment with you. You can continue talking about this. This is why we love having you as a guest. Stick around for more, folks.
We'll be right back with more of Prepping 2.0 with authors Shelby Gallagher and Glenn Tate right after this.
PrepperNet, where preppers unite. Looking to meet other like-minded people in your area? Looking to start your own prepper group? Already have a group? Join PrepperNet.com. PrepperNet has gathered the biggest names in the industry to help unite preppers everywhere. Join John Jacob Schmidt, Scott Hunt, Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy, Glenn Tate, Shelby Gallagher, Charlie Hogwood, Samuel Culper, Survivor Jane, Rick Austin, Franklin Horton, Ryan Mitchell, and Brian Duff. Our team is united. Check us out at PrepperNet.com. PrepperNet, where preppers unite. PrepperNet.com.
Prepping 2.0 is about that next level of prepping. One of the key 2.0 items to have is bulletproof body armor plates. I used to think body armor was too tactical for a regular guy like me, but it isn't. Give yourself, your family, and your team an unfair advantage when bullets are flying. Body armor used to be expensive and hard to get. Not anymore. KD Armor, and that stands for Come and Take It, makes solid and affordable body armor for normal people. Get body armor while you can. The clowns in Congress are trying to prohibit future sales. KD Armor is the place to get it. CATI armor.com. Prepping 2.0 listeners get a 10% discount when you use the coupon code GRANT.
When the grid goes down, darkness will descend fast. Used to be there was nothing you could do about an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, or CME, coronal mass ejection. Now you can protect your electronics, protect your family, thanks to EMP Shield. EMP Shield invented a simple-to-install device that prevents whatever's connected to it from frying in an EMP or CME, and it costs just a few $100s. EMP Shield has been tested by independent laboratories and passed muster with the government, which has ordered lots of them. Google EMP Shield and see for yourself. And save some money. Get a $50 discount per device. Go to prepping2-0.com. Click on the Friends and Affiliates page, then click on the EMP Shield logo. At checkout, use coupon code PREPPING2.0. It's all one word.
Shelby Gallagher here. We found that you need to layer your food preps.
Yeah, this is Glenn Tate here. A lot of times the hardest part of layering is the long-term foods. We love Numana foods, which have a 25-year shelf life and are non-GMO. Also, organic meals are available.
Numana comes in family-style portions and in bulk. This is not backpacking food. It's family meals that last for at least 25 years. The perfect freeze-dried part of your food layering.
You can get a sample of Numana meals for $19.95 and see for yourself. You will be amazed.
Prepping 2.0 listeners get a 10% discount by entering the code PREP.
Go to Numana.com or click the link on the Prepping 2.0 website.
Give it a try. Numana.com. That is Numanna.com.
And we're back with more of Prepping 2.0 with authors Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher.
We are back now in segment 2 with Matt Shea, and he is talking about the objective factors that show or indicate that a society is in a civil war or heading to one, and he's listing them off, and then he will be applying them to America. Matt, just keep going. This is great stuff.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you guys having me on and everything you're doing to get folks to move to action and preparing and instead of just talking about it. It's awesome. Before the break, we talked about the legitimization of violence, and I was talking about this individual who firebombed or attempted to firebomb a federal facility over in Western Washington. He was wearing a John Brown Gun Club hat. He said he was Antifa. The media really would not try to cover that. And people say, well, what is the John Brown Gun Club? The John Brown Gun Club is actually associated with another organization called Redneck Revolt. Their motto is putting the red back in redneck. I don't make this stuff up. Quite literally red as in communism. Redneck Revolt published online an interesting thing. It's called the Mini Manual of the Urban Guerrilla by Carlos Marighella. And Carlos Marighella was a Brazilian communist who wrote this manual. He was also implicated in the kidnapping of a U.S. ambassador in 1969. He was killed later that year, Carlos was, by police. And he was a terrorist. He was a communist terrorist in Brazil. Well, Redneck Revolt published this mini manual of the urban guerrilla, and it listed out some of the tactics and techniques and procedures that terrorists should use. And if you read that manual, you see that that is what is being used by Antifa, by the John Brown Gun Club in America today. You can actually just follow it. They're following their manuals. And I've studied Marxists for the better part of my adult life. They always follow their manuals. That is one thing that they do fairly consistently. And so when you see this and the media not speaking out about it, I mean, could you imagine a patriot group, right, publishing something like that online and somebody else acting in accordance with the manual, attacking a federal facility? My goodness, it would be all over national and international news. And yet the media is not reporting on this issue. Another organization, the Socialist Rifle Association, has been downplayed by the media, and yet personally, a member affiliated with them issued a death threat against me that was investigated by federal authorities. And so, you know, they're putting these chapters everywhere in America, and you can go on their websites and see on their maps where they're at. For example, there's a Socialist Rifle Association chapter in Spokane, most people didn't even know about it. On their Facebook page, they posted the Soviet national anthem. And that really is a slap in the face to our Slavic community, which I'll get to here in a second. So you see this legitimization of violence from Marxists and Islamists in America today, and this covering by the media that's happening. So again, polarization without resolution. There's a feeling that no matter what's done, that the Marxists and Islamists in this country are going to continue on their bent to overthrow our constitutional republic. Divisive press coverage. Clearly that's happening. A loss of trust of institutions. Clearly that's happening. The level of deep state infiltration and corruption has Americans very alarmed, and more importantly, losing trust in those institutions. You have a sellout of leadership that I mentioned, and you have this legitimization of violence. Now I'm going to go back to the root causes as they apply to America. Do we have occupation and exploitation? Well, we don't have occupation of a foreign power yet. And I want to stop there. In the Financial Times, 2-3 weeks ago, there was an article published that should alarm every single American. It was an opinion piece in the Financial Times, which is a very well-known, well-read publication by Simon Cooper. And this was on, November 20th, 2019, and it was entitled this, How Foreign Intervention Can Save U.S. Democracy. And in this article, this guy actually advocates for the United Nations to send in, and the impression made in the article is troops into America, election observers into America, other UN authorities into America to save our, quote, democracy. And he also advocates, and this is from his article, the rewriting of the United States Constitution by a Loya Jirga. And for those of you that don't know that term, that is effectively an Afghanistan tribal council, all right? Something similar to rewrite the Constitution in the United States. In other words, not our elected representatives, but some sort of a tribal council, of course, which they would appoint because they know better than we did. Okay, that is an extremely alarming piece to have in a mainstream publication to advocate UN intervention in the United States of America and a rewriting of the United States Constitution. Glenn, that's sedition. That is sedition. That is the very definition of sedition. And this was published. It hasn't been retracted. This is an example of the advocation now of occupation of our country by a foreign power. Also, Ilhan Omar earlier this year advocated the United Nations intervene in America in regards to the border issues. So you have sitting elected representatives, you have the mainstream media advocating for the occupation of America by a foreign power. Is there exploitation happening in America? I think clearly there is. There has been the exploitation of minority communities for a very long time by Marxists in America to use them as a voting bloc, and yet their situation really doesn't improve until Trump came into office, and it's dramatically improved, and you're seeing this now walk-away movement. Another root cause, the attack of the identity of a group of people. You are having that happen in America where if you believe that the Constitution means what it says, if you believe the Bible means what it says, you want to cling to your Bible and your guns. If you believe that you have the right to life, that the unborn have a right to life, that the average American citizen has the right to liberty and should be free from the surveillance state, if you believe that you should have property rights and that the EPA can't just swoop in and take your property for arbitrary reasons, if you believe that this right to bear arms is unalienable, it's given to us by God and should not be impaired or infringed, then suddenly now you're being attacked for that. You're being attacked for saying that there is a Judeo-Christian foundation to America, which, by the way, is fact. That is historic fact. It cannot be argued. From the Virginia Charter to the Mayflower Compact to the Articles of Confederation of the United Colonies, which was the first document uniting the colonies in 1643, you cannot deny that fact. But if you say it now, that identity is now being attacked. In other words, the culture, tradition, and heritage of America that made America great, that allowed freedom to happen in America. And by the way, the Chinese did a study on this, and it was detailed in a book called Jesus in Beijing, pages, I think, 15 and 16, if I recall correctly, detailed this, that what made America great and the West great was Christianity, because it allowed the freedom and it allowed the emergence of capitalism. And they didn't have any doubt about that, and they talked about that in their report. So this attacking of the identity of America that made America great is happening in spades in this country. And you can just look at Trump being attacked right now the way he is. The same thing is happening to me in the Washington State Legislature, where they're trying to attack without really due process or cause at this point. And they're doing it across this nation. It's not just happening to us. And it's not about us as elected officials. It's about the people and attacking that identity. Interestingly enough, in that memorandum that Rich Higgins brought forward to President Trump, he actually talks about this, that their goal is to demoralize the people that voted for Trump, but more importantly, the ideas behind those people that voted for Trump. They're trying to crush those ideas, and those ideas are freedom and liberty. So that's happening in America. Third, corruption and repression. We see that happening, corruption particularly happening all over the place with the deep state and some of these new revelations that have come out. Economic failure. Well, we haven't seen that yet because of Trump's policies. Some people think there might be an economic downturn next year. That remains to be seen. But the other root cause I really want to focus on is the attack on religion. And I just briefly mentioned that. There is an all-out attack on Christianity right now by the Marxist forces in America. And people can try to argue that, but it is absolutely true. You can look on social media. Christianity is being attacked in spades in America. I've been to Argentina, Ukraine, Ethiopia in the last year, and in those countries, they are actually mentioning this attack. Some of the attack is coming from other so-called Christians or leftist-affiliated, I should say Marxist-affiliated churches. Some of the attack is coming from the mainstream media, but either way, you have a specific religion being targeted and being called hateful, being called subversive to the state. And it's important to understand that these same terms were used by Vladimir Lenin as an excuse to murder millions of people in the former Soviet Union and also under Stalin. So those are the root causes. Those are the factors. Those are how they apply to the United States of America. And I also want to mention, too, this talk of civil war in America isn't some fringe thing that, only patriots are talking about. There were 30-plus articles recently in Russian media outlets on the possibility of an American civil war. Now, I understand that part of that is their propaganda arm, but The Atlantic, which again is a mainstream, it is, I would believe, a progressive publication, dedicated an entire magazine recently to this issue of the next American Civil War. And in that, they effectively blamed the current state on the structural failure in the democratic system. Well, again, we live in a republic, so the fact that they don't understand that or they're mischaracterizing it intentionally is actually adding to this. The second was the tribalization of politics. In other words, they were recognizing the polarization without resolution in America. They also recognized the, quote, pathological levels of inequality, end quote. In other words, the exploitation that's happening in America. They recognized the rise of technology and its use as part of this, but also, most importantly, the demographic and geographic upheaval that is occurring because you have areas or regions that have a specific cultural, traditional, and heritage idea in that area. And I'm sorry that was a little bit inarticulate, but they have it in that area, and that is resisting other demographic and geographic areas in the country. And they also admitted this, which is fascinating, that people no longer seem to know who we are or what our common purpose is. In other words, that there has been an evisceration of the identity that made America great. Now, they identified the following factors. They said that the president is a grifter. So in other words, they're dehumanizing and demonizing our president. They also mentioned globalization, post-industrial economy, economic inequality, hyperbolic nature of social media, geographic sorting, and I want to get to that here in a second. And then again, they blame the president's rhetoric. So they also said something that I found very offensive, but also it seems to be the provocation, like the folks that are Marxists are trying to provoke a civil war by saying things like this, that, quote, white Christians are losing to the browning of America, and that ethno-nationalism is really the problem, they argue. They also malign counter-majoritarian politics. In other words, anybody that's a minority standing up against the majority or countering the majority is really the problem in America. Well, no, that's not the problem in America. That's the minority saying our God-given unalienable rights still are here regardless of who's in power. And so they find that as a problem. And again, I think that is a fundamental issue that is actually provoking a civil war and provoking some of this stuff from these progressive publications. I think it's very clear that's what they're trying to do. Lastly, there is an attempt to destroy what the former Soviets called the kulaki or the kulaks. These are the leaders and successful members of society, typically the middle class, an attempt to destroy the middle class. And so the Atlantic, when they wrote this article, they try to come off as, they're trying to have an objective analysis about civil war. They're actually, by their ignorance and intentional mischaracterizations in there, really provoking it, if that is an intentional mischaracterization. So I want to kind of shift gears to a recent thing that happened to me. I was down in Mexico and was talking to some local folks down in Mexico about the history of Mexico. And I believe it gave me an insight into kind of the trajectory that we're on in America. And by no means is this trajectory, I believe, a foregone conclusion. But in Mexico, again, at the beginning of the last century, they had this so-called revolution. It really was not a revolution. It was a civil war. It was where regions began to resist the central government and each other to a certain extent. And today, you can see this, and I believe one of your previous guests called it the cartelification of America. And you can see this happening in Mexico, where this cartelification, where you have these regions now broken down by the cartels. And in fact, I saw the other day where there was this attack on a hospital, and they literally stormed a town, the cartel did, and took a guy from a hospital and then dismembered him shortly thereafter as a message. This cartel actually had trucks with the label of their cartel on it, like the acronym of their cartel on the side of the trucks, very official looking. And you have this breakdown into regions that are fighting against each other. I believe that is kind of the trajectory of America right now, where you have regions of freedom, and then you have areas of America that literally do not want to live according to the Constitution anymore. They want to throw it out and rewrite it. And so you can kind of see that happening in America right now. I'm going to stop there because I'm sure you have some questions, but that is it in a nutshell, what the trajectory that we are on in America, if the Marxists and Islamists continue unabated to be A, recognized, and B, countered, they are going to continue along the path to try to replace our constitutional republic with something vastly different and vastly more tyrannical.
Wow. And as usual, I cannot add anything to that except one minor point, and that is this cartelification thing. That was our episode of about a month ago with Sean Swanson. I don't have the episode number, but everyone listening needs to read or listen to that. It was the cartelification of America. Sean, who's a former special operations guy and private military contractor, has been all over the world, seen horrible, yucky stuff where cartels run things. And by the way, we need to quit thinking of cartels as just like drug dealers or gangs. It's way bigger than that. Cartels occupy territory, they govern, they provide essential services, they are a counterweight to a corrupt central government like in Mexico or Lebanon or Thailand or Iraq or Afghanistan or some other places that he's been. People need to listen to that. And Matt, I remember it was about a week ago, you and I had a conversation about your trip to Mexico and this cartelification thing. And we both came to the conclusion that this cartelification idea is the thing we've sort of been thinking of and talking about, but we were never able to put a label on. And by that, I mean, that when America breaks down, for all the reasons you've previously mentioned, it's not going to be people in blue uniforms versus people in gray uniforms in entire states. It's going to be way messier than that. There's going to be a centralized government that is weakened because, for all the reasons you've mentioned. There are going to be some states that act one way. There's going to be urban centers that act one, and that's going to be the leftists. That's where they congregate. And then there's going to be the suburbs and the hinterlands. Every one of these items I've just mentioned is another layer of complexity and sort of a spectrum. And filling in this power vacuum will be local and regional cartels, but it won't be in a small town. It won't be Los Zetas or the Sinaloa cartel or the Gulf cartel running things. By the way, SPLC, go ahead and take a note here. We're not talking about Mexican drug cartels invading America, okay? So just quit being stupid and listen to our words, right? But the cartels, again, a clunky, inaccurate word, that'll be operating in America, in cities, suburbs, and the country might be, and people laugh, but I'm serious, might be the Rotary Club. And by that I mean, I don't really mean the Rotary Club. I mean, small businesses might get together and defend their town, and they're not going to do horrible things necessarily. They may, who knows? It could be local criminal gangs that start acting like cartels. It could be motorcycle gangs. It could be rogue elements of law enforcement. Who it is doesn't matter. What matters is, preppers, listen to me, please, because this is critical. Here's what you need to prep for. You need to navigate through and operate successfully in your area, understanding that there's a complex cast of players in here. You have to navigate around the government and not get killed by them. You have to navigate around Marxists. Hopefully you're defending yourself in that category, and also understand that there are cartels or gangs or groups or whatever you want to call them that are also operating. You need to have a plan for how you deal with this complex thing. And a great example is in Mexico. A cartel with its acronym rolls up to a hospital, dismembers somebody. They're obviously not afraid of being prosecuted by the weak, corrupt Mexican government. So you need to think like that. In other words, like what the threat is, not that you're going to go out and dismember people, but you need to understand that your normalcy bias, which you mentioned at the beginning of this, Matt, thank you very much, because that's the root of the problem when preppers are out thinking about this stuff. Your normalcy bias is, well, the police will come and take care of it. And you need to understand that won't be the case. And there's so many parallels between what's happening in Mexico and, this is my opinion, and the future, and Shelby's too. We talk about this because this is what we do for fun over coffee in the morning, right? And you need to navigate around this, and it's local. I mean, who the president of the United States is in a few years, it matters in some ways, but it kind of doesn't matter in other ways, because there might be some, the Russian word for mafia is businessmen. There might be some businessmen. Could be the Rotary Club for all we know. By the way, Kiwanis, Lions, I don't pick on anybody. I'm equal opportunity. But there's going to be local stuff that you're going to need to deal with. So I think I've made that point. We have a couple minutes. Let's start a big topic, a great topic that we'll take into the after show along with some other great topics, and that is coup. Matt, is there a coup going on, and how does that factor into the United States as either in a civil war or heading towards a civil war?
Well, absolutely, there's a coup that has been attempted. There's no question about it. It fits every single hallmark of a coup or the overthrow of an existing government. And that's been their stated intent. And, with revealed text messages, that's been their stated intent, that to overthrow the duly elected president of the United States of America. But more importantly, why? Why do they want to overthrow him? It's because of what he stands for. And he stands for this idea, which is why the American people voted for him, of freedom and liberty continuing into the next generation. And that is the greatest obstacle to the globalists and the Marxists and the Islamists achieving their goals, is the American people. And we can get into in the after show about regional cultures and how that has been already mapped out and identified by no less than a New York Times published article.
Wow, yeah, and we'll save that, I think, for the after show, but it is a factor. Just so you guys know, here's some other topics that we'll have in the after show. And Shelby alluded to this earlier. We don't intentionally save the good stuff for the after show. It's just that it takes about an hour of the regular show to get rolling and all this good stuff to come out. We're going to talk about this coup idea, how gun control plays into all of this, whether it's a spark, and the example of Virginia. That has been an extremely heartening thing for me, and we'll ask Matt what he thinks. But I kind of think I've been a little bit too hard on the general population about just rolling over on some stuff. And what we're seeing in Virginia is a nice little microcosm of what might be coming and how that plays out. And then Matt's going to talk about something that we call the state of King. You're saying, what? State of King? What's that all about? Basically, Washington, and this applies to every state, okay? So this isn't a Washington State thing. Washington State, many people in rural, conservative Eastern Washington want to split off and form their own state. Not secede from the Union, not declare war on anybody, but simply go through the constitutional process that's been gone through many, many times of creating a new state. Well, King County is where Seattle is. That's the bad place, King County. Turns out that a lot of people in King County don't really like people in Eastern Washington, and people in King County, and Matt can talk about this, but this applies to any urban center, are saying things like, well, why are we sending all our tax money over to Eastern Washington? You know what? We don't need those hillbillies anyway, which is another hallmark, guys, of the Civil War factors we're talking about. Even the liberals are realizing that maybe a bit of a separation would be a good idea. And then in the after show, we're going to have some Patreons put in some really thoughtful messages about what they think an alternative term for Civil War would be, something like restoration or something like that. And we'll ask Matt what he thinks about these terms to describe what's going on to the general population. Well, that is it for the regular show. Thank you for listening. Please listen to the after show. Thank you so much, Matt, and we're out.
You've been listening to Prepping 2.0 with authors Shelby Gallagher and Glenn Tate. All of the fun and easy prepping information heard on this podcast can be found online at prepping2-0.com. You can also find out more about Glenn's books online at 299days.com and about Shelby's books online at agreatstate.com. Until next time, be smart, be safe, and be prepared.